Chapter 1. Shadow of Memories. In the early morning of the town, the coolness was wrapped in mist, and it seeped into every corner. Amy closed the bedroom door gently, as if she was afraid of disturbing the tranquility, or as if she was avoiding something. She walked slowly into the kitchen with a heavy heart in every step, and her eyes subconsciously cast towards her mother Mary's room. Behind the half-closed door came Mary's heavy and slow breathing, which sounded like an old clock, and each breath was tired of the years. Amy knew that her mother met her sister Amanda in her dream again, the sister who was taken away by her father 20 years ago and disappeared from their lives. Mary's face has long been engraved with vicissitudes of time, and the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes are like interlaced gullies, spreading wantonly. Her eyes have become turbid due to years of crying, as if covered with a layer of fog that can never be wiped off. As long as Amanda is mentioned, tears will burst out uncontrollably, like a flood that breaks the dam, expressing a mother's endless regret and longing. Amy stood at the kitchen window looking out at the misty street. The trees on the street swayed gently in the breeze, making rustling sounds, but it could not soothe the waves in her heart. At this moment, guilt overwhelmed her like a tide, and her thoughts drifted uncontrollably back to the night that changed everything. Amy and Amanda are twins. They were inseparable when they were young. But that day 6-year-old Amy suddenly had an idea and pretended to be sick just to get more attention from her parents. She lay in the warm bed, listening to the fierce quarrel between her parents in the living room. The voices were getting louder and louder. Her father's angry words cut through the air like a sharp blade, and her mother's rebuttal was crying. At that time she did not understand that her parents' quarrel was not because of her little willfulness, but the huge pressure of both of them being unemployed. The family's savings had bottomed out, and they could not afford to pay for the children's treatment. Her pretending to be sick became the last straw that broke the camel's back. The next morning when Amy woke up, the house was filled with strange silence. The father did not appear at the table as usual, and the mother's face was full of panic and anger. The mother rushed to Amy's bedside, grabbed her shoulders tightly with both hands and shook her hard, her voice sharp and trembling. "Are you pretending to be sick? Do you know how much trouble you have caused?" Amy was frightened by her mother's appearance and tears burst out of her eyes. She realized that her willfulness had caused a family disaster. On that cold winter night, the father decided to abandon the sick child and let her fend for herself. And the mother, out of love for her little daughter, mistakenly thought that Amy was really very ill. In panic and helplessness, she quietly swapped Amanda and Amy. The mother thought that the stronger Amanda might have a greater chance of surviving outside. "If I hadn't replaced you and your sister at the beginning." The mother's hoarse voice suddenly came from behind, and Amy's heart sank suddenly, as if it was grasped by an invisible big hand. She turned around slowly and saw her mother standing at the door, her eyes empty and confused as if she was lost in endless memories. "Mom, stop talking." Amy walked forward and gently held her mother's hands, which were full of blue veins and rough and cracked. She tried to speak as softly as possible. "Tomorrow morning I will take you to the cemetery to see Dad." A trace of pain flashed across Mary's eyes, and the pain was like lightning, flashing across her eyes in an instant. Then she nodded slightly, her movements were slow and heavy, and then she slowly turned around and walked back to the bedroom with a staggering step. Amy looked at her mother's back, her heart full of helplessness and sadness. She knew that her mother could never get out of that painful past, and she was also trapped in the shadow of the past and couldn't extricate herself. Amy walked to the sink, reached out and turned on the faucet, and clear water flowed out, making a gurgling sound. She put the pot on the stove, poured in an appropriate amount of water and turned on the gas switch. The blue flame jumped up instantly, licking the bottom of the pot. As time went on, the water in the pot gradually began to bubble. The gurgling sound gradually became louder and the steam rose up, blurring her vision. She closed her eyes involuntarily, and the scene of that night 20 years ago played clearly in her mind like a movie. "Amy, breakfast is ready." Her mother's voice came softly, interrupting her memories. Amy slowly opened her eyes, wiped the tears that had welled up in her eyes, and brought the prepared breakfast to the table. "Mom, please eat something." Amy pushed the plate in front of her mother. The plate contained simple bread and fried eggs, exuding a faint fragrance. But Mary just moved her chopsticks mechanically a few times, her eyes always staring out the window dully, as if there was something she had been looking for outside the window. Mom, don't always think about those things. Amy sighed helplessly, trying to comfort her mother. Amanda is gone, we can only look forward. Mary raised her head suddenly, and a trace of anger flashed in her eyes, and that anger was like a burning flame. Look forward? How can you be so indifferent? That's your sister. Amy lowered her head, her heart full of guilt and self-blame. She knew her mother was right. She had been running away all along, running away from the past that she couldn't bear to look back on, running away from the mistakes she had made. She didn't know how to face her mother's pain, nor how to make up for the damage caused by her willfulness back then. Mom, I know you're in pain. Amy said softly with a hint of sob in her voice, but if you go on like this, your body will collapse. Mary didn't answer but just ate breakfast silently, and every bite seemed to be swallowing endless pain. Amy looked at her mother and knew that the pain in her mother's heart could not be soothed by a few words of comfort. She needed time and an opportunity to face the long-forgotten past. Chapter 2, Strange Return. Amanda stood on the street in the town, her soles rubbing against the familiar yet strange ground. 20 years have changed too much, but the old locust tree on the street is still lush and leafy. Its thick branches stretch out in all directions as if guarding the town, and also evokes Amanda's deepest memories. The small church in the distance, with its spire glowing softly in the sunlight, and the sound of the bells coming from afar, seemed to return to that dark night, when her father hurriedly left with her in his arms, and her mother's heart-wrenching cry behind her. That cry had echoed in her dreams countless times, becoming an unhealed scar in her heart. She took a deep breath, calmed her surging emotions and walked into the street cafe. The store was filled with the unique aroma of coffee, mixed with the sweet aroma of snacks, which made people feel inexplicably at ease. Amanda ordered a latte and sat down in a corner. Her eyes inadvertently swept forward, but suddenly stopped, because she heard the familiar voice, the conversation between Mary and Amy. If I hadn't replaced you and your sister back then. Mary's voice came with deep regret and endless longing, like a sharp knife, piercing straight into Amanda's heart. Her hands unconsciously clenched the coffee cup, her knuckles turned white due to the force, and her nails almost embedded in the wall of the cup. Those deliberately sealed memories suddenly came like a tide. When she was a child, Amanda ran back to this small town secretly. At that time she was looking forward to seeing her mother looking for her everywhere and worrying about her, but the scene in front of her made her heart completely cold. Without the support of her father, her mother went out to work, but even if life was difficult, her mother's eyes were still full of love when she looked at Amy. After a hard day, her mother would smile and bring back Amy's favorite snacks. She would gently tuck Amy's quilt corners at night and hum a lullaby softly. This wholehearted love, like a thorn, deeply penetrated Amanda's heart. Why was she abandoned while Amy could monopolize this motherly love? Her full expectations turned into anger and unwillingness, so she turned around and returned to the wealthy home, burying her desire for family affection in her heart, and letting resentment take root in her heart. Amanda looked at the mother and daughter, feeling mixed emotions. She saw the wrinkles at the corners of her mother Mary's eyes and the white hair at her temples. The years had left deep marks on her face. Although Amy had grown up, her eyes still hid guilt and uneasiness. Amanda was struggling in her heart. On the one hand, she was in pain and resentment for being abandoned for many years. On the other hand, she couldn't completely let go of the blood-thicker-than-water family affection in front of her. She took out her mobile phone and looked through the information she had investigated before. Amy worked hard in an advertising company, with ordinary performance and barely making ends meet. Her mother Mary lived on a meager pension and her health was not as good as before. She was often tortured by illness. Looking at these, Amanda's emotions became more and more complicated. Sympathy, resentment, and confusion intertwined, making her a little overwhelmed for a while. She knew very well that she couldn't forgive them so easily, but she also knew that acting impulsively would not solve any problems. After drinking coffee, Amanda got up and left the cafe. Standing at the door, she looked up at the sky. The sun shone through the clouds on her face, warm, but her heart was still cold. She secretly calculated in her heart that she needed a comprehensive plan, which could not only make them understand how much harm her mistakes had caused her, but also allow her to completely let go of the past and start over. Her eyes gradually became firm, and she walked steadily and disappeared on the streets of the town. Her figure was somewhat resolute, and there was also a hint of imperceptible expectation. Chapter 3. Prelude to Revenge. Amanda sat in her spacious and bright apartment, looking at the bustling night scene outside the window. The neon lights of the city flickered and vehicles shuttled through the streets. Everything seemed so lively and noisy. However, her heart was as cold and silent as the night. She had investigated the living conditions of Amy and Mary in detail through various channels. Their lives were not rich and they lived a tight life, but they were still peaceful. She knew that Amy had been living in guilt for herself, and her mother Mary spent her days and nights in longing and regret. Looking at these investigation results, Amanda had a strong desire for revenge in her heart. The desire was like a flame, burning in her heart, burning more and more. She decided to make them feel pain and fear and make them pay a heavy price for what they did back then. She turned on the computer and the light of the screen reflected on her face, making her eyes look even colder. She began to carefully plan the first step of the revenge plan. She first bought some anonymous letters online and printed out cold and sharp words on the printer. Do you think the mistakes of the past can be forgotten? It will haunt you forever like a ghost. Then she carefully put the letters into an envelope and sent them anonymously to Mary. Then she came to where Amy parked her car. It was an old parking lot with dim lights around. Wearing black gloves, she took out a sharp screwdriver from her pocket and quietly walked to Amy's car. She squatted down with a flash of determination in her eyes, and stabbed the screwdriver into the tire with force. With the hissing sound of air leakage, a twisted pleasure surged in her heart. When she saw Mary's panicked expression after receiving the letter, and Amy's face full of anger and helplessness when she found that the tire was punctured, the flame of revenge in her heart burned more vigorously. But she also knew that these were just the beginning. She wanted to make them truly feel the pain of loss, the kind of pain that went deep into their bones. One night, the moonlight was like water, sprinkled on the streets of the town. Amanda, dressed in black, came quietly to Amy's home like a ghost. She hid behind a big tree and saw Mary and Amy sitting in the living room chatting through the window. The light in the living room was dim and soft, reflecting their faces. She saw the deep longing and endless pain in her mother's eyes, and the guilt and helplessness on Amy's face. At that moment, Amanda's heart trembled slightly, and a long-lost warmth seemed to surge quietly in her heart. But she quickly gritted her teeth and forced the warmth down, and her eyes became firm and cold again. She told herself that she couldn't be soft-hearted, and they had to pay the price for their actions. Amanda took out a pre-matched spare key from her pocket. This key was made by her after a lot of trouble and secretly took it out of Amy's bag. She walked gently to the door, inserted the key into the keyhole, turned the key, and the door lock made a click sound. She slowly pushed open the door, deliberately making some subtle noises. Mary and Amy, who were chatting in the living room, heard the noise and looked up in fear, their eyes full of confusion and anxiety. When they saw a strange woman standing at the door, their bodies tensed up instantly. "Who are you?" Amy's voice trembled with obvious fear. Amanda walked slowly into the living room. Each step was steady and slow, her eyes were as cold as a cold pond. "I am your nightmare," she said word by word. "I am Amanda, your abandoned sister." When Mary heard this, her body shook violently as if she was hit by a huge force and she almost fell to the ground. Amy quickly reached out to support her mother, but her eyes were always fixed on Amanda. Her eyes were full of shock and guilt. "You're back." Mary's voice was so weak that it was almost inaudible, as if it came from a distant place. "You're back, my child. Don't rush to recognize your relatives." Amanda sneered, and the laughter was full of ridicule and resentment. "Do you know how I have been living these years? Do you know how much pain and suffering I have experienced after being abandoned?" Amy lowered her head, tears rolling in her eyes. She knew that all the faults were hers. Her willfulness at that time made her sister lose her original warm family, lost the love of her parents, and spent countless days and nights in loneliness and fear. "Why did you come back?" Amy raised her head with a hint of trembling and despair in her voice. "Are you back for revenge?" Amanda did not answer but just looked at them coldly. Her heart was like a pot of 5 flavors overturned, and all kinds of emotions were intertwined. She knew that the flame of revenge was already burning in her heart, and she seemed to be unable to control the spread of this flame. "Amanda, I know I was wrong. Amy's voice was choked with sobs and tears finally burst out of her eyes. I know that my willfulness back then caused you so much suffering. I really regret it. Amanda sneered again. Regret? Do you think a word of regret can solve everything? How can the pain I have suffered over the years be compensated by your regret? Mary raised her head, a trace of pain and self-blame flashed in her eyes, and tears slid down her cheeks. Amanda, my child, I know I was wrong. I failed to protect you. I am a failed mother. Amanda's heart trembled suddenly. Seeing the tears in her mother's eyes and the guilt on Amy's face, her heart was shaken for a moment. But soon the desire for revenge took over again. She turned and strode out of the living room, leaving Mary and Amy in the living room speechless, with heavy depression and pain in the air. Chapter 4. The Price of Revenge. Amanda stood in her luxurious office on a high floor in the city center, overlooking the bustling and noisy city street scene outside the window. The sun shone on her through the huge French windows, but failed to dispel the haze of hatred in her heart. Her slender fingers tapped lightly on the desk, and her eyes revealed a hint of determination. The plan of revenge had already matured in her heart, like a sharp blade about to be unsheathed, shining with cold light. In order to make Amy lose her job, Amanda used her extensive network of people in the business circle. She first secretly contacted several important clients of Amy's advertising company and fabricated some false information about Amy's low workability and careless attitude. Those clients valued interests. After hearing these negative news, they said that if the company did not dismiss Amy, they would consider terminating the cooperation. After weighing the pros and cons, the company's senior management finally decided to carry out a round of layoffs, and Amy naturally became the one to be laid off. When Amy received the notice from the company's human resources department, she was stunned. The documents in her hand slipped and fell to the ground, her eyes full of disbelief and despair. She had worked diligently in the company for many years. Although her performance was not outstanding, she had always worked hard and never thought that she would lose her job in this way. She tried to explain to her boss, but all she got was a cold response and a helpless shake of the head. As for Mary, Amanda took a more covert but extremely lethal means. She hired some people to spread rumors about Mary in various corners of the town, such as markets, cafes, community activity centers, etc. She said that Mary's family broke up because of her own fault, and even made up a false story that Mary had behaved indecently. These rumors spread rapidly among the residents of the town like a plague. Mary, who was originally introverted and secluded, clearly felt the strange looks and whispers of people around her when she went out. When she went to the supermarket to buy things, the cashier's attitude towards her became cold. When she walked in the community, the neighbors saw her and hurriedly avoided her. Mary's life seemed to be shrouded in a shadow. Her mental state became worse and worse, and she cried all day long. Amanda secretly observed Amy and Mary's every move through various channels. When she saw Amy walking out of the company gate in a daze and Mary's helpless and painful appearance when she was stared at by everyone on the street, a twisted pleasure surged in her heart. However, this pleasure did not last long, and soon, a deeper emptiness and confusion overwhelmed her. She realized that the satisfaction brought by revenge was only a short-lived illusion and could not really fill the huge hole left in her heart by being abandoned. After experiencing the initial despair and collapse, Amy began to calm down and reflect on her behavior. She recalled that when she was a child she pretended to be sick, which led to her father taking her sister Amanda away, and the family was broken apart. The root of all this seemed to be her selfishness. Her heart was full of regret, and that regret was like a cancer growing in her heart. After a painful struggle, she decided to muster up the courage to apologize to Amanda, even if it was just to get a little relief in her heart. Amy came downstairs to Amanda's apartment. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her pounding heart. She walked up the stairs slowly, and each step seemed so heavy. Standing at the door of Amanda's apartment, her hands trembled slightly. After hesitating for a long time, she finally mustered up the courage to press the doorbell. "Amanda, I know I was wrong." Amy tried to keep her voice steady but still couldn't hide the sobs in it. "I know that my willfulness back then caused you so much suffering. I really regret it." Amanda opened the door, stood quietly at the door, looked at Amy coldly, and a complex and indistinguishable emotion flashed in her eyes, with anger, resentment, and a subtle expectation. I know it's too late to apologize. Amy lowered her head, tears rolling in her eyes. But I hope you can give me a chance to make up for my mistakes. Amanda was silent for a long time, and her heart was struggling fiercely. On the one hand, the hatred for many years made it difficult for her to let go easily. On the other hand, the sincerity in Amy's eyes caused a ripple in her heart. She knew that revenge could not really solve the problem but would make more people fall into pain. But how could she easily forget the days of being abandoned and tortured by loneliness in the past? Do you think an apology can solve everything? Amanda's voice was a little angry and she unconsciously raised her voice. Do you know how I have been through these years? Do you know what I have experienced after being abandoned? Amy raised her head. A trace of determination flashed in her eyes. She looked directly into Amanda's eyes and said, I know I was wrong. But I also know that we can't be trapped in the past. Amanda, we are a family, we can face the future together. Amanda's heart trembled suddenly, and Amy's words hit her heart like a heavy hammer. She saw the sincerity in Amy's eyes and the expectant eyes of her mother Mary in the room far away, looking through the crack of the door. But the hatred accumulated in her heart for many years made her unable to let down her guard immediately. I'll take a look, Amanda said coldly, then turned and walked into the apartment, closing the door with a bang. Amy was startled by the sudden sound of the door closing. Her body trembled slightly and she could no longer hold back her tears, which burst out and slid down her cheeks. She stood alone at the door, feeling lost, but at the same time she secretly made up her mind to make Amanda truly forgive her. Chapter 5. Career Crisis and Self-Doubt. Amanda was immersed in the short-term satisfaction and long-term emptiness brought by revenge, and she didn't notice that her work status had quietly changed. When she was in charge of an important project in the company, her mind was full of revenge plans against Amy and Mary, and she couldn't focus on the project at all. She used to be rigorous and meticulous, but this time she was negligent in some key data. Although the mistake was not big, it was still keenly captured by her competitors. The competitors seized this handle and began to spread it widely within the company, exaggerating that Amanda abused her power and did not hesitate to harm the interests of the company for personal grudges. These rumors spread like wildfire and soon reached the ears of the boss. The boss called Amanda into the office with a gloomy face. Amanda had always performed well in the company and was highly valued by the boss. She was about to be promoted, but this incident made the boss very suspicious of her. Amanda, what's wrong with you recently? This project is related to the important interests of the company, but you made such a low-level mistake. There are many rumors about you in the company now. I hope you can give me a reasonable explanation. The boss leaned back in his chair and stared at Amanda. Amanda opened her mouth and wanted to defend herself, but found that she had nothing to say. She knew in her heart that all this was because she was blinded by hatred. After leaving the boss's office, she returned to her workstation and looked at the unfinished work on the computer screen. For the first time she had deep doubts about everything she had done. For revenge, she did not hesitate to hurt her family, and now she put her career in crisis. Is it really worth it? Those painful memories of being abandoned came to her mind again, but this time she seemed to see something else besides hatred. She thought of the guilt and sincerity in Amy's eyes, and the regretful face of her mother Mary, and her heart was shaken. The sky outside the window gradually darkened, and the neon lights of the city began to flicker. Amanda sat at her desk, lost in thought. She knew that she had to make a choice, whether to continue to be driven by hatred, or to let go of the past and re-examine her life and family. Chapter 6. Reconciliation and Redemption. The sun shines through the thin clouds and sprinkles on the slightly old streets of the town, casting a soft golden color on everything. Amy sat on the sofa at home, looking at her lonely mother Mary with mixed feelings in her heart. After a few days of careful consideration, she felt that it was time to face the past together, and the cemetery was the first stop for them to start again. Let's go to the cemetery to see Dad. Amy's voice broke the long silence in the room. Her voice was soft but with a hint of unquestionable firmness. Amanda sat on the chair opposite. Hearing this, she raised her head and her eyes met Amy's. She saw tears flashing in Amy's eyes. There were both regrets for the past and expectations for the future in those tears. Okay. After a moment of silence, Amanda nodded gently. She knew that this was a step they could not avoid. Only by bravely facing the past could they truly move towards the future. They supported Mary and slowly walked out of the house. Mary's body trembled slightly and her steps seemed to stagger a little. Every step seemed to exhaust all her strength. Along the way the three of them did not speak. Only the breeze blew gently, blowing the leaves on the roadside, making a rustling sound as if telling the stories buried deep in the years. Arriving at the cemetery, John's tombstone stood there quietly. The weeds around it had been cleared and it looked particularly neat. The moment Mary saw the tombstone, her body trembled violently. She broke free from Amy and Amanda's support, walked slowly to the tombstone, her legs softened and knelt on the ground. Tears poured down from her wrinkled face like a flood. "John, I'm sorry for you." Mary's voice was deeply choked, and every word seemed to be squeezed out from the depths of her soul. "I failed to protect our daughter. I am a failed mother." As she spoke, she gently stroked the tombstone with her hand, as if she wanted to touch her husband's once warm face through this cold stone. Amy also walked to the tombstone and knelt down slowly. Her tears silently dripped on the tombstone, shining with crystal light under the sunlight, as if she was atonement for her past mistakes. "Dad, I know you must hate me very much." Amy's voice was trembling, "but I think you know that I have grown up and I know I was wrong." She lowered her head and hugged the tombstone tightly with both hands, as if she could get her father's forgiveness. Amanda stood aside, quietly watching the backs of her mother and sister. A complex emotion surged in her heart, with painful memories of the past, resentment towards her mother and sister, and a desire to let go of everything and start over. She knew that she could no longer let hatred continue to blind her heart. It was time to face the past and face her family. "Mom, Amy, I'm back." Amanda slowly walked forward and knelt beside her mother and sister. Her voice trembled slightly. "I know I have done a lot of wrong things, but I hope you can forgive me." Mary turned her head and looked at Amanda, with a hint of surprise and touch in her eyes. For many years she has been looking forward to seeing her daughter again one day. Now that this moment has finally arrived, her heart is filled with joy and relief. "My child, you are back." Mary reached out her hand and hugged Amanda tightly with endless love in her voice. "I am already very satisfied that you are back." Amy also turned around and hugged Amanda, her tears dripping on Amanda's shoulders. "Amanda, I really regret it." Amy's voice was choked with a little sob, "but I will use my life to make up for my mistakes." Amanda's tears also flowed down. She hugged her mother and sister tightly, feeling the long-lost warmth of family affection. She knew that the wound between them could not be completely healed in a short time. It would take time to repair this broken family relationship, and it would require mutual understanding and tolerance. But at this moment they have taken the crucial first step. "We are a family." Amanda raised her head and looked at her mother and sister, her eyes full of determination and hope. "We will face the future together and create a new life together." The sun shone on the tombstone, as if it was also sending the best wishes for this reconciled family relationship. Chapter 7. New Hope. In the park of the town, the grass is green, the flowers are blooming, and the breeze is blowing, bringing bursts of fresh air. Amanda, Amy, and Mary sat on a bench in the park, enjoying this rare tranquility and warmth. The sun shines through the gaps in the leaves, casting mottled light and shadows on them, as if covering them with a layer of golden gauze. After the frank communication in the cemetery, the ice in their hearts has begun to melt slowly, and the relationship between the family has gradually eased. They decided to start over and work hard to make up for the regrets left by misunderstandings and hatred in the past. Amanda also made up her mind to stay in the town and use her wealth and ability to help the people in the town, while also creating a better future for her mother and sister. "Amanda, thank you." Amy gently held Amanda's hand, her eyes full of gratitude. "I know it's hard, but I'm grateful that you're willing to come back." Amanda smiled slightly. She patted Amy's hand gently and said, "We are a family, let the past be the past. The important thing is that we can face the future together now." Her smile was full of warmth and hope, which was the vision of a new life. Mary sat aside, quietly looking at her two daughters, and a trace of relief flashed in her eyes. For many years she has been living in pain and self-blame. Now seeing that her two daughters can reconcile, her heart is full of joy. She knows that they have successfully walked out of the shadow of the past and ushered in new hope. "Amanda, are you willing to help me redecorate the house?" Mary's voice was full of expectation. She looked at Amanda with a gleam in her eyes. "I want to make our home more cozy." Amanda nodded and said without hesitation, "Of course, Mom. We can design it together and make it our new beginning." She imagined the redecorated home, full of warmth and laughter, and her heart was full of expectations. Amy also said excitedly, "I can help design posters to promote our new home. Maybe I can find a new job through this opportunity." Her face was full of smiles and she was full of confidence in the future. So in the following days the family began to get busy. Amanda contacted a professional decoration team and discussed the decoration plan with her mother and sister. From the layout of the room to the choice of furniture, they carefully discussed and designed every detail. Amy used her professional expertise to design a series of creative posters for the new home. The posters not only have the design renderings of the new home, but also a happy photo of the family. During the decoration process, they encountered various problems and difficulties, but the family always worked together to overcome them. The joy of solving each problem made their relationship closer. A few months later, the new home was finally decorated. When they walked into the brand new house, they were stunned by the scene in front of them. The bright living room, the warm bedroom, the garden full of vitality, everything was as beautiful as they expected. "This is our new home." Amanda looked at her mother and sister, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Our new life starts here." Amy and Mary also hugged Amanda excitedly, and their laughter echoed in the house. The sunlight shone on them through the window as if sending the best wishes for this new beginning. Amanda knew that her road to revenge had ended, and her road to redemption was extending towards a hopeful future.